Revenge with Karen. I knew something was wrong when the CEO's assistant forgot my name again, while asking me to fix the thing I built. Sandra, Stephanie, can you look at the latency issue in the cross-region sync? I didn't bother correcting him. I just opened the terminal, ran the diagnostic, and quietly prevented a cascading sync failure that would have cost the company $180K in SLA violations by morning. No thank you. No follow-up. I was already walking back to his lunch with the product team, the same team that once unplugged a server to charge someone's vape. That's how it always went. I was the airbag they didn't know existed, until they hit a wall and wondered why they weren't bleeding. My official title was operations manager, but unofficially, I was the last thread holding the tapestry together. Every compliance update, every disaster recovery flowchart taped in the break room during quarterly drills was me. The risk model tied to finance's automated reconciliation logs. Me. The backup failsafe embedded in our vendor API router that kicked in during high-load events and got us that partnership award in Q2 last year. Me again. But no one invited me to leadership offsites or those obnoxious bowling nights where VPs drank overpriced seltzers and called it team building. I wasn't one of the hoodie-wearing golden boys with seed stage swagger. I was the one who updated the escalation matrix when they forgot to do it before a platform launch. I was the ghost in the machine, quiet, constant, competent. And if you're the kind of person who appreciates stories where the ghost finally steps out of the shadows to remind everyone who built the house, go ahead and subscribe, maybe hit the like. It keeps this whole dysfunctional little team going, and trust me, you don't want to miss how this one plays out. Back to it. There was a rhythm to the job, a kind of battered grace. I'd start each day with a check of the compliance dashboards. Not because I had to, no one checked those unless something broke, but because I knew that's where trouble whispered before it screamed. I maintained our infrastructure like a groundskeeper tending a graveyard. Every warning log, every silent error, every skipped heartbeat in the system had meaning. People like to think the flashy parts of a company are the product and the pitch decks, but they're wrong. The real company lives in its bones, in the ductwork of data, the policy triggers, the duct tape scripts someone wrote 4 years ago that still route 40% of customer support tickets. That was my world. Most of the team didn't know what half of it did. They didn't have to. That was the point. I built it so they could move fast and break things. I'd be the one quietly sweeping up the glass before the clients noticed. I didn't crave credit. I didn't want applause. But I did expect basic recognition. Maybe a thank you when a dashboard stopped blinking red on a Sunday night, or not being the first name floated when they talked about streamlining ops. But that's the thing about being the safety net. Eventually, someone decides you're just cluttering the view. It started small. Slack messages that used to be "can you look at this right now?" turned into "do we still need ops involved?" Meeting invites that used to default to me stopped. I was watching my own disappearance like a security cam stuck on one feed. Quiet, slow erosion. Still, I kept the lights on. I didn't raise hell. I didn't complain. I thought if I just worked harder, they'd remember why they trusted me in the first place. But companies don't remember. People do. If the people change, the memory dies. The first real red flag was when my name didn't appear on the Q4 headcount sheet. That sheet always included department leads, even if budgets were tight. But there I was, blank space where Sarah M. used to be. I sent a message to HR, joking about how maybe I'd been promoted to mythical internal watcher. No response. The second flag was worse. Friday meeting popped onto my calendar. Reorg prep HR. No agenda, no details, just that gut-deep thud of dread. And yet, I still showed up. I still showed up because I thought maybe they'd ask me how we could cut costs without gutting safeguards. I thought maybe they'd ask about the 6-month contingency I'd built during the vendor migration last year. But they didn't want my input. They wanted my silence. Just didn't realize that silence was something I had programmed, very carefully. And it had teeth. The HR room smelled like peppermint air freshener and denial. Nicole, the same HR rep who once forwarded a phishing email to the whole company with the subject line urgent, Bitcoin payroll update, sat across from me with the laminated smile of someone who's rehearsed sympathy in front of a mirror. "Hi, Sarah," she said, like we hadn't spoken in over a year. "Thanks for making time today." I didn't reply, just waited. She glanced at the man next to her, David, the director of HR ops, which basically meant middle management executioner. He had a manila folder with my name typed neatly on the tab. It was already open. "This isn't performance related," he began, voice low, serious, with that infuriating calm voice people use when they're about to kick you down a well. "The company's undergoing a slight reorganization." Probably heard some buzz. "Slight," I echoed. My voice didn't crack. That seemed to surprise them. Nicole leaned in like a guidance counselor in a Lifetime movie. "It's nothing personal, really. Just a pivot toward a more scalable ops model. Leadership's decided to reassign certain infrastructure roles to vendor support. Fewer internal dependencies. Translation: we outsourced your brain to a third-party ticket farm in Denver." I nodded once, not because I accepted it, but because I already knew. The moment I got the calendar invite with no agenda, I started pulling logs. My name had been scrubbed from the project index 2 weeks ago. A new Git repo had been spun up with access granted to a cloud ops restructure group. The funny thing, they used one of my provisioning scripts to build it. David slid the folder forward like it was a peace offering. "There's a statement in here. I'd like you to read it to your team at Monday's stand-up, just to help smooth the transition." I opened it. The first line was bland enough to be AI generated. "As part of our continuous evolution, we are realigning operational resources to best meet the challenges of tomorrow." Further down, "Sarah will be stepping back from day-to-day operations to explore new professional horizons." Like I was going backpacking. At the bottom, "Her contributions have been deeply appreciated." I stared at the period at the end of that sentence like it was a bullet hole. "Of course, we'll handle technical offboarding internally," Nicole said. "We've already scheduled your access deprecation to begin Monday evening after your final sync." Ah, there it was. That was the mistake. Because access deprecation, in the systems I built, isn't just a security measure, it's a trigger. Protocol I wrote 3 years ago during the Great Outage, when I stayed up 46 hours straight rebuilding infrastructure after a contractor nuked the config. I didn't just build systems to recover from disasters. I built systems to detect when I was removed and respond accordingly, quietly, automatically, without requiring human emotion or permission. I smiled then, not wide, just enough to make David shift in his chair. "Anything you want to say?" asked. "Yes," I said. "Thank you for confirming it." "Confirming what?" Nicole blinked. "That you never read the back-end documentation." She laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that dies in your throat. I stood, carefully folding the statement back into the folder. My hands didn't shake. "I'll read it," I said, word for word. "Monday morning." They looked relieved. I was calm. But inside was a fuse, long and slow, connected to a very old switch they forgot existed. Because somewhere deep in the infrastructure, under layers of automation, redundancy, and blessed ignorance, Protocol 7.2.9 was waiting. And they'd just handed me the microphone. That night, I didn't drink wine or cry in the shower like I'd seen people do in those melodramatic LinkedIn job loss reflections. I sat at my kitchen counter with a cold Diet Dr. Pepper and reread the statement they'd asked me to read aloud, like a confession written by someone who didn't know what they'd done wrong. The language was so sanitized it could have doubled as an air freshener ad. Evolving challenges, renewed focus, operational agility. Not a single word about responsibility. Nothing about the system dependencies I managed. No mention of the cascading triggers or compliance gates. No plan for deactivating the operational kill chain I'd spent 3 years building, not because I wanted power, because someone had to think about what happens when ops goes dark. They hadn't even bothered to copy the full offboarding checklist. That checklist was my insurance, not for me, but for the system. For the code no one understood, the APIs that looked like magic to half the C-suite. I set the folder down, gently, like I was laying a headstone. Then I reached for my laptop. The terminal window blinked open like an old friend. I didn't hesitate. I didn't rush. Just run sudo su ops Sarah, invoke failover watchdog, mode compliance, and force the script didn't do anything flashy. No alarms, no Hollywood hacker nonsense. It simply validated my credentials, cross-checked current access roles, and logged the discrepancy. Primary protocol custodian pending offboarding. Contingency enforcement in 72H. That's all. A clock started ticking, quiet, invisible, and inevitable. They thought offboarding was a calendar event. But in the logic of the system, it was a risk vector, a vulnerability, and Protocol 7.2.9. That wasn't a revenge plan. That was a containment measure. Back during the great outage, I wrote it while half-drunk on stress and energy drinks, watching teams scramble in a Slack thread with 4,000 unread messages. Was designed to stabilize core systems by triggering staggered lockdowns when administrative roles were altered without proper certification and override delegation. They'd never updated the override because they never read the doc. The next 72 hours would look normal to everyone unless you knew where to look. Client syncs would start lagging. Audit logs would stop backfilling. Certain third-party APIs would request keys from a now-deprecated subdomain. None of it would scream sabotage. It would look like entropy. It would look like absence. I wasn't deleting anything, wasn't hacking, wasn't breaching. I was just letting the system follow its own rules, the ones they approved, the ones they ignored. That's the thing about systems, especially the ones no one thanks you for maintaining. They don't get mad. They don't throw tantrums. They just stop helping. I sat back, watching the cursor blink. Then, slowly, deliberately, added one note to the comment log embedded in the script. Full offboarding per internal protocol, 7.2.9. Let them read that on Monday. Let them read it out loud. The air in the Monday stand-up was the kind of stale that only comes from a weekend of no one touching the thermostat. A few team leads trickled in late, half-lidded from too much IPA and not enough shame. Any from front-end kept tapping his smartwatch like it was a magical portal out of discomfort. I stood at the front like a damn funeral director for my own career, holding the manila folder that still smelled like whatever cologne David from HR marinated in. Thanks for joining, I said, voice level. Eyes flicked up. Most of them already knew something was off. People are like dogs. They sense it in the tone. I have a short update from HR, I continued, reading the first line exactly as written. As part of our continuous evolution, we are realigning operational resources to best meet the challenges of tomorrow. Jason, one of the junior sysadmins, blinked hard. You could see the internal monologue scrolling across his face like a terminal log. What does that even mean? I read the next few sentences flat, like a weather robot reading a forecast for rain that had already started falling. Sarah will be stepping back from day-to-day operations to explore new professional horizons. Her contributions have been deeply appreciated. No applause, no thank you card, just polite confusion smeared across a dozen half-awake faces. And then I added my line, calm, clear, and offboarding will include full systems decommissioning per 7.2.9. Silence for 2 seconds, then movement, tiny, specific. Ben, back-end engineer with the busted keyboard and Mountain Dew addiction, narrowed his eyes. I saw the flash of a mental Rolodex, flipping to protocol numbers he hadn't heard since onboarding. Next to him, Clara tilted her head like a golden retriever, hearing a word she almost recognized. But HR didn't even blink. David was standing just outside the circle, arms crossed like a proud shepherd who had successfully delivered the lamb to slaughter. Nicole smiled with that nervous, brittle energy that said, almost over, almost done. I closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge, held it up. Everyone watched, not because of ceremony, but because it was too quiet not to. The badge hit the table with a gentle clack. I nodded once to no one in particular and walked toward the door. Jason muttered, wait, what's 7.2.9 again? No one answered. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard Ben whisper to Clara, that's not the decommission protocol, is it? But by then I was already at the elevator. I didn't look back. The doors slid shut. My phone buzzed, an automated message confirming my badge had been deactivated. Perfect. Protocol 7.2.9 would now enter phase 2. It wouldn't yell. It wouldn't crash. It would withdraw, gracefully, deliberately, like a tide pulling away from the shore, taking all the sandcastles with it. I walked out into the morning sun like I was late for brunch. Inside that building, I had been invisible scaffolding. Now I was subtraction. And subtraction is quiet until you realize what's missing. By the time the first glitch was reported, I was halfway through a mushroom omelet at a diner off I-90, phone on silent, notifications disabled, Bluetooth off. My only plan for the day was to let my coffee go cold while I stared out the window and watched middle managers in lease subs try to beat a yellow light like it owed them child support. Back at the office, someone opened a Jira ticket at 6:03 a.m. titled Client Notification Delay Urgent. No exclamation mark. Just that little question mark, like a shrug dressed as punctuation. By 6:17, support team realized that onboarding emails for new clients had stopped sending entirely. At 6:29, the automated data sync to the CRM failed silently, twice. At 7:12, a finance intern flagged that the payroll API had thrown a permissions error when trying to initiate the biweekly cycle. The error code, 422 dependency lock. That was the first hard stop, because payroll wasn't optional. That's when they started checking logs. Only, they couldn't. Admin logs were restricted. Override credentials failed. The CTO, Greg, the same guy who once said in a town hall that documentation is a crutch for the weak-minded, tried to manually reroute access via the elevated service account. Blocked. The system had marked all override attempts as unauthorized. The reason? Right there in the audit trail. Protocol 7.2.9, admin not verified. Annual override requires primary custodian credentials. The room where Greg sat turned quiet in the way a server rack sounds before it fries. They tried escalating through the IT command tree. That hit a wall, too, because when I wrote the automation rules, I'd made sure they couldn't simply promote someone else in a panic. The role of primary protocol custodian had to be assigned manually, on-site, with dual authentication by me. Of course, nobody had updated it, because I was redundant. By 9:00 a.m., Slack was pure chaos. The IT channel exploded with questions, red alert emojis, and increasingly panicked GIFs from people who had no idea why the API dashboard now showed a flickering red flag next to every external-facing system. Why is Sandbox payment testing down? Who disabled Stripe webhook listener? Can someone reassign ops custodian access? By 7.2.9 showing as active. I wasn't tagged in any of them because I was already gone, and even if they had tagged me, it wouldn't have helped. My access was locked. My inbox auto-replied, "This account is no longer monitored." One brave junior engineer tried to email me personally. The subject line, "Quick question kill chain." The body just said, "Was this you?" I didn't reply, but I did smile, because the beauty of Protocol 7.2.9 wasn't in its destruction, it was in its restraint. It didn't delete anything. It didn't sabotage. It just withheld. It treated access like oxygen, and when the wrong hands reached for the controls, it made the air thinner. The first few hours were manageable. They spun up a few support tickets with vendors, blamed the CRM for being flaky, pretended it was API latency, but they were already on borrowed time. Because 7.2.9 wasn't a trap, it was a mirror. And they were about to see exactly how much of their system had been propped up by someone they hadn't invited to a single leadership sync in 4 years. And I was eating hash browns, the kind with too much grease and not enough regret. By lunchtime, Office had turned into a live-action IT horror film where every printer exercised itself, and the Slack channels read like dispatches from a sinking ship. The CFO stormed into the war room with his tie already loosened, holding a printout of the payroll error stack like it was a subpoena. Why the hell can't we process payments? The CIO, who once gave a whole all-hands about resilience through redundancy, was now sweating through his recycled polyester shirt, uttering about cron jobs and SSH access like a man praying to gods he never believed in. Legal was worse. They had real stakes, contracts, liability, SLA violations. Marcy from compliance kept flipping through archived documentation with this look on her face like she'd just discovered the Ark of the Covenant, and it was booby-trapped. "It says here," she announced to the room, that Sarah was listed as the sole custodian for Protocol 7.2.9. Greg, the CTO, looked up from his laptop pale. "Wait, sole? Sole," she repeated. And look, she even submitted a formal risk assessment 2 years ago about centralized protocol governance without qualified redundancy. The CFO snatched the email from her hand like it was a crime scene photo. It was dated almost exactly 25 months prior. Subject, contingency protocol maintenance and role delegation line 3. Failure to assign backup custodian will result in compliance triggers and access lockdown if automated removal is detected. Line 8. Highly recommend reauthorization of Protocol 7.2.9 with at least one secondary override credential. The response from Greg at the time, "Let's revisit in Q4. Not a fire drill." They never revisited. Now they were burning. Attempts to reset core access were met with the same message across every terminal. Error 1403, override not permitted. Protocol active. Custodian credentials required. They tried rolling back system states. Didn't work. The protocol had webhooks embedded in external service listeners. It detected rollback attempts as security breaches and responded accordingly. By escalating to Phase 3, internal log visibility started fragmenting. Error messages compounded. The DevOps team watched helplessly as the real-time dashboard bled red and black like a stock market crash. Vendor integrations failed. Third-party APIs reported expired tokens, but no one could refresh them because no one had access. Sarah did. Sarah had, and Sarah was gone. Back in my apartment, I sipped lukewarm coffee and read the text from Ben, backend dev who once had the guts to ask how things worked instead of just saying, "It's working now," and closing the ticket. "Ben, did you plan this?" I stared at it. Then typed back one character, slightly smiling face. I didn't need to say more, because he remembered. He remembered when I brought up the importance of fail-safes, of backup roles, of not putting all your trust in institutional memory with no institutional respect. He remembered when I was told, in a meeting, risk modeling is a luxury in this market, and now the market was closed. Internally, the Whisper network began buzzing. People remembered the late-night fixes, the quiet saves, the servers that never fully crashed because somehow Sarah had set a limiter. They started piecing it together. Sarah didn't just run operations. Sarah was the operation, and she'd walked out with a smile. The CFO stared at the error dashboard, blinking like a heart monitor in flatline. Asked legal the question that would hang in the air for days. Are we, legally speaking, hostage to our own system? Marcy didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because Protocol 7.2.9 wasn't malicious. It was meticulous. And leadership was about to learn the difference. The emergency meeting wasn't on the calendar. It was shouted across the hallway like a fire drill, with fewer exits and more lawsuits. CFO slammed the glass door shut behind him so hard the blinds trembled. He didn't sit. He just paced, waving a printed stack of logs like a mad preacher in a revival tent. Who gave her that kind of access? Greg, the CTO, looked like he hadn't slept since Friday. He didn't even bother defending himself, just rubbed his temples and mumbled, "She built it. We just let her." That answer hung in the air like a fart in an elevator. RC from legal flipped through a 3-ring binder like she was looking for the page that said, "We're not liable." She didn't find it. Instead, she paused halfway through a subsection of the old compliance overhaul from 2 years ago. Guys," she said. Everyone turned. This clause. It names Sarah M. as the primary protocol custodian. Greg leaned over to look. That's the original security architecture addendum. I thought you didn't," she cut in. It was never revoked, never reassigned. You all signed off on it when you approved the auto-dependency mesh. The room went still. The CFO sat down slowly, like his knees had decided to betray him. "She has exclusive authority," Marcy added, "on any system marked as high contingency layer 1, which apparently includes everything critical." "Jesus Christ," muttered someone in the corner. "Don't invoke the Lord right now," the CFO snapped. He outsourced this one. Meanwhile, I was sitting at a small cafe 3 blocks from the chaos, sipping the same cinnamon latte I used to sneak between patch deployments. On my screen, a secure dashboard pulling live logs from my personal diagnostic replica, one I built during the AWS regional outage 2 years ago when I realized no one upstairs had a recovery protocol that worked without praying. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even hidden. I documented everything, just never read it. The error logs were now stacking like Jenga bricks before a quake. Client comm sync failed, missing token auth. Payroll chain blocked, custodian access required. Vendor API relay timed out, retrying in 6H. Override request admin global denied. Each one, a little digital nudge reminding them what happens when you remove the stabilizer bar and expect the ride to keep running smooth. I refreshed the dashboard and scrolled down. We're trying to brute force a credential override through a deprecated admin pipeline. I watched the attempt flag as unauthorized access escalation tier 2, which meant the next automated alert had just been triggered, an email to the board's compliance subcommittee with a timestamp, with my name on the original protocol chain, and a copy of the clause that said, plainly, "In the event of primary custodian removal, system protections will engage until verified reauthorization by original architect or designated successor." There was no successor, because no one thought to name one. They were too busy migrating operations to a cloud-first agile vertical solution stack, whatever that meant on Greg's slides. I took another sip. Somewhere in their office, someone had just said the phrase external auditor in a voice too loud to be reassuring. Whole company was now realizing the foundation they thought was made of scalable cloud solutions and outsourced support tickets was actually one pissed-off woman with a 7-year-old ThinkPad, a paranoia problem, and a system designed to obey only one voice. Mine, and I'd already signed off. By Wednesday morning, the situation had gone from unfortunate hiccup to corporate malpractice. Systems weren't just acting glitchy anymore, they were failing, one by one, a slow domino toppling the entire operational spine of the company. CRM data, incomplete, billing, stalled, vendor access, blocked for authentication timeout, customer emails, bouncing like debt checks in a casino. The contract with their biggest vendor, $1.6 million a quarter, was now technically in breach. The SLA clause specifically required uninterrupted data availability for key services. Timestamped logs showing failures had already been auto-forwarded to their legal team. Finance had it worse. The Q3 data couldn't be reconciled because the ledger sync had stalled when the payroll API hit the access wall. No one had noticed for 36 hours. Now it was like trying to do your taxes, while your bank says, sorry, all the deposits are invisible today. The CFO looked like a wax statue, melting under courtroom lighting. Hadn't changed shirts in 2 days. He'd gone from fuming to whispering. A junior financial analyst, probably 2 months out of grad school and still dumb enough to be honest, said what no one else dared to: we have to get her back. Greg, the CTO, scoffed. She wouldn't take our call. But then silence. Because they all knew I would. I wasn't doing this to hurt them. I didn't have to hurt them. I just had to let them live in a world without me. Turns out, that was painful enough. My phone rang at 10:43 a.m. No caller ID. I let it ring twice before I answered. Hello, Martin, I said before he could speak. Pause, breath. Then, Sarah, he said, voice trembling like a man standing in a building he once called fireproof. We need to talk. About what? I sipped my coffee. The protocol you failed to revoke, the clause you forgot to reassign, the part where you had me read my own firing notice like I was hosting an obituary for Logic. Another pause. Then the real question. What do you want? I smiled. Protocol 7.2.9, I said gently, was never designed to punish anyone. Just to protect everything I built. You fired the protection. Now you're feeling the consequences. Sarah, please, he said, but the begging wasn't the good kind, the kind that comes from remorse. This was the corporate flavor, baked in panic and frosted with desperation. I'll make it easy, I said. Triple my salary. Consulting basis. Full immunity. No NDA unless I write it. And I choose the override successor. Not you, not Greg, me. There was a long silence on the other end. He didn't say no. Because he couldn't. Because even now, as the company was wheezing and bleeding money, they still didn't fully grasp what I had protected them from. We're only seeing the edges. The full scope of what 7.2.9 contained, the fallbacks, the watchdog triggers, the intersystem dependencies I'd built over 6 years of being ignored but never blind, that was mine, and all I'd done was let go. I wasn't a hacker. I wasn't a saboteur. I was an ex-employee honoring the systems I built, by the book, line by line. After all, they told me I was redundant. I just made sure the system agreed. Boardroom was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that sits on your chest like a debt collector, waiting to be acknowledged. The CFO stared at the screen, wide-eyed, pallid, lips parted in some mixture of awe and horror. The dashboard in front of him pulsed red, not blinking but breathing, like a machine on life support with no one left qualified to pull the plug. Lines of system status errors crawled across the screen. Sync failed backup chain unverified, access locked custodian override active, degradation in progress no succession authorized. Legal sat across from him, holding the printout with both hands like it might bite her if she let go. She didn't even clear her throat before reading aloud. Access override locked by Sarah M., protocol custodian. Manual reversal requires live credential. A beat of stillness, and softly, like the question had been haunting him all week, the CFO whispered, "Who gave her the kill switch?" No one answered, because they all had. They gave it to me when they approved the documentation without reading it. They gave it to me when they asked me to fix things they never understood. They gave it to me when they ignored my warnings, dismissed my proposals, and handed me a script to read instead of a seat at the table. Now they were paying the price. Literally, my screen pinged. It was a wire confirmation. The full consulting payment, triple my old salary, plus an NDA drafted by their own panicked lawyers. They'd even thrown in a signing bonus under the line item emergency retainer. Cute. I was sitting in a sleek co-working space downtown, sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows, latte to my right, fresh pen in my hand. Across from me sat the CTO of a rising competitor. He slid the offer letter across the table, already signed on her side. "Name your start date," she said. I signed it, dated it, passed it back. No drama, no performance, just clean, professional, surgical transition. Exactly how I liked my exits. I tapped the keyboard once, turned off all notifications. My inbox from the old company blinked out. Final message archived. Contract closed. Then I opened my resume, scrolled to the bottom, and added one last line. Redundancy protocol designer, fully enforced. And then, finally, I smiled. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.